Hello, I'm Pamela Davis. Welcome to episode 166 of the Well Done Life podcast. Hello, and welcome back to episode 166 of the Well Done Life podcast. I'm your host, Pamela Davis. If you are new here, hey, how are you? Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here with us this week. If you've been here before, you guys know the deal. I love you deep. Thank you so much for continuing to support me on the journey. I couldn't do this without you, and I'm just really grateful and appreciative for all your support. Before we get started with this week's episode, I like to make sure that I set the proper foundation. If you guys have been listening to me for a while, I'm sure you're like, oh my goodness, it's like a broken record, but I have to. It's just so important to me to make sure that we set this foundation on really solid ground. I mean, we're building a safe space, and I like to make sure that this safe space, this house, is built on two very important foundations, and that is clarity and love. Clarity is really straightforward. I just want to make sure that you understand that I created the Well Done Life because I believe that women are the foundation of society. Straight to the point. That's really what it is. I really do. I think that we are the foundations of society, and we need places and spaces where we can be our most authentic self. So that is what this space is about. This is an opportunity for us to come together, to laugh, to share our tears, to cry, to grow, to be inspired, to do all the things, because I want to see us all win. There's room out here for all of us. We just have to sometimes sit still enough to listen and to hear each other's with an empathetic and loving heart. So I hope you know that everyone that I share with you, everything that I share about myself, it really is set apart so that you will feel inspired within yourself to tell your story, because your journey is beautiful. And sometimes we don't give our journeys the credit that they deserve. Yeah, sometimes they can be tough, and we've experienced some really hard things. But we've also experienced moments where we are flourishing and thriving. And I want you to be comfortable in all of it, because the story of you is beautiful, no matter how the pages look. And you can inspire someone, you can save someone with your journey. So I hope that you take a little bit of that inspiration and spread it, because that's what helps us all live the well done life. So now that you know why you're here, I like to also make sure that you understand that everything that we do in this space is rooted in love. And love is the second most important foundation. It's the foundation that I actually love the most. So I like to make sure that what I do is I send you prayers every week, because I truly believe that when two or more people pray, we magnify. And I honestly think I'm not the only person out here praying for us. So I like to make sure that I send you prayers. This week, I'm going to definitely send you prayers of empathy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But empathy is really important because everyone's story is different. And like I said, it takes a lot to face the story of ourselves. A lot of our pages are torn or stained, and sometimes they're not the things that we like to share. But when we have courage to stand within ourselves, to look in the mirror of our lives and own who we are, it takes a lot of courage and bravery to be able to stand that vulnerable, that open. So when we encounter people, we have to realize that a lot of times people are coming at us from a place of vulnerability, and we have to be empathetic, or we should be empathetic to what people are going through, to what people experience, because you never know what you could learn from that person. And again, you don't know what it took for that person to get to the point where they could stand in the trueness of who they are. So I definitely want to make sure that I send you all prayers of vulnerability this week. Along that line, I'm also sending you prayers of reflection, because of course, you want to be able to be vulnerable. You want to be empathetic to someone else. But I hope it also makes you reflect on your journey and where you are and what you've overcome and the things that you're working on overcoming right now. Take moments to celebrate all the things that you've accomplished, mourn the things that didn't go the way that you wanted them to, and move forward. Look for lessons, because there's lessons in everything. But, being able to reflect and see where we are and celebrate or plan and strategize how we're going to move forward, they're really key points to our healing. They're key to us on our journey of growth. And we're all getting busy again. We're all just like going around kind of acting, if we think about it, pre-pandemic. And, sometimes we have to remember the lessons that we learned in the time where you couldn't go anywhere, and how we all dialed back into ourselves. Don't get caught up in the hype of life that you forget to take moments for who you are, moments to reflect on what you need, what you want, what you've accomplished, what you've survived, so that you can be inspired to keep going. So I do also hope that you will have moments of being able to reflect. And then finally, wrapping out my prayers. Again, I always wrap them out with abundance because, of course, I want you to be blessed in all levels financially, but I also want you to be blessed spiritually. And when you are able to stand in the trueness of yourself with empathy and accept who you are and reflect on all of the things that you've been able to accomplish, that's where you're also able to tap into the richness of your soul. Because again, it just speaks to the resiliency of you. It speaks to all of the beauty inside of you. All of our journeys are beautiful, and all of our experiences make us abundant. So I hope again that you take a moment to reflect on all of those three things, that you are able to magnify these prayers, and that you are covered in abundance, empathy, reflection, love, and so much more. So those are my prayers for you this week. I am recording on Thursday, September 4th at 8:36 p.m. It has been an amazingly beautiful week, very busy, and life is lifing, and we're all outside doing all the things. And I am just so grateful to be here with you guys. I want to thank everyone for their support of last week's episode 165, Brown Mama Bear with Shanera Williamson. Shanera, like I said, is a podcaster. And if I think about it, she's like a community activist. She's building space for Black and Brown mamas and parents to just kind of come together and talk about the challenges of raising Black and Brown children in today's society. And it's not always just about, obviously, the challenges. It's about also being open to allyship and just really making sure that we're setting course, a foundation for our future generations so that they can stand proud in who they are, and how to help parents feel supported and navigated in those spaces. So I hope you get an opportunity to check it out. That's very important work. I mean, our children are our future, so we definitely want to make sure that we support them, and as well as creating spaces for us as families, as parents, to be able to connect and not feel so alone, to realize that, it does truly take a village to raise a beautiful family. So I hope you get a chance to listen to that episode if you have not. But this week I am back and I have another guest, and I'm really excited about you hearing our conversation. Her name is Catherine Garland, and I'm going to let Catherine introduce her journey. She is an author, she is a professor, and she's a woman who who is standing actually in the vulnerability of her truth so that she could try to help inspire other people to heal. And so I hope you guys have a moment to grab a cup of tea, cup of water, whatever floats your boat, and you sit back and relax, because Catherine will be with you in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
First of all, thanks for having me, Pam. I truly appreciate it. I also feel like this conversation, first of all, I feel like we already had this conversation somewhere in the ethers.
Yes, I agree.
We just have to do this for the people.
Yes.
So I appreciate you having me here, though. So I am Catherine Garland, and I like to tell people my name is Catherine with no E at the end, and Elizabeth is my middle name, which has caused a lot of issues in my life. My mother was being creative, but it ended up being a situation where I have to explain how to spell my name constantly.
Yes.
And so my author name is actually K.E. Garland, because I didn't want to have to explain constantly. So that is my pseudonym. I do go by Kathy. So a couple of things about me. I am by trade, and for many years, a professor of education. So I teach people how to teach. And that is how I pay my mortgage.
Smart. I understand.
Right. I also am a writer, and I kind of came back into writing, I want to say in 2014. So almost 10 years now. So I began writing when I was about 10 years old. And what happens in a lot of, I want to say a lot of families, but also in a lot of Black families is, it's like, well, how are you going to pay your rent? And so it's kind of like, oh, that's really nice. And you seem really gifted at that, but we're not going to like necessarily nurture that part of you. So it got dropped. That's one reason.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of other things happened in my life that, well, writing just wasn't the priority there. So I became a teacher and then eventually a professor. But I returned to it in 2010 and kind of like with a full, I don't know, gusto, I would say. Yeah, where I just had this urge to write everything and in all ways. So I'm not just an author, I'm actually a blogger as well. And I have 2 blogs that I maintain. One is a personal blog and one is a community blog. Because as I entered, midlife with all of the things, I felt like I needed somebody to talk to about that with. And so I have that blog. I'm also published as a scholar and published creatively. So, like I said, it's kind of like, I don't know what happens, but something just kind of clicked. I was about 40 something. And then I was like, oh yeah, I need to lean into this writing thing. So,
well, I love that you are here, and I'm very glad that we connected while you were at this point on the journey, because being here in our midlife, it definitely shows that it gets greater later. So
right.
I'm very excited about it. To kind of start us off, I have to ask, how did you get started? Like, as a writer, as a teacher, like what motivated you to take this path that you've taken?
So I'll lean into the writing answer more so, because the teaching answer is, I think, super simple.
Okay.
Well, I'll answer both, actually. So I became a teacher literally so that I could not go back home and so that I could be self-sufficient. The reality is, like, at that point in my life, about 21, 22, I didn't necessarily have a home to go back to. So it was really clear to me that I had to find something to do that was going to make money consistently and give me some insurance. And teaching was that. And I became an English teacher very specifically because, and I wouldn't have admitted this before, but I know now it wasn't because I loved, children or something like that. It was because I loved reading and writing. And so that was the way I was able to make money doing that. So now in 2014, a friend of mine had asked me, I'd gone natural, and a friend of mine had asked me to write something for her about going natural. And so I write this whole thing and I give it to her. I don't hear anything back. And I'm like, I thought you needed it for something. I thought you were going to use it. And she's like, oh yeah, never mind. Like I don't, basically she didn't need it. Okay. So then I'm like looking around and I don't remember how I found this, but For Harriet, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So somehow I found For Harriet and I submitted what I had already written for that. And so because I come from academia, when you publish something in academia, it can take years, literally. And it's like all these phases where they tell you, well, yes, almost good enough, but you need to change X, Y, Z. And so it takes like about 2 years to get anything published. I send this to For Harriet, and I think her name is Kim. She publishes it immediately.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's about my natural hair journey and how people this was, like 2011 when I went natural. So I started noticing, like how people kind of look at you like, like, what is that? They don't know if it's cute or not. So I did this whole thing, and she publishes it immediately. And because it's an international blog, basically, because anything on the web is, I start getting all these hits, right? And I'm checking back like every hour, and I think it was like 1,000 or so whatevers and comments and things. And I was like, somebody read this?
They liked you.
Yeah, right. And they liked it? Huh. I was like, I think I'm supposed to write. Like, it was just so clear. I was like, I think I'm supposed to be a writer. And I like almost couldn't breathe. I remember my friend at the time, she was like, just calm down, don't. I was like, this is crazy. Somebody's actually read my words and has said something about them, like, oh yeah, me too, or whatever, really connected. And so from that point on, I was like, oh, let me tap in to whatever
Yes.
this is, not just the gift, but like when you're gifted in a certain way, you can, I don't know, you get inspiration from somewhere. And I'm not
Right.
going to pretend to know where it comes from. But yeah, that was the feeling. I was like, oh, I need to just tap in and write the writing thing.
I love it. And I was going to ask you, because it sounds to me from what you were describing earlier, like tapping into your intention or tapping into yourself has kind of like guided you as you have gone through life. How has that guided you to writing? Like how, because of course, I'm thinking of the books that I had a chance to read, The Unhappy Wife and Daddy. How did you get there?
So before I did The Unhappy Wife, I published an ebook of quotes, and it's called Quoted, and it's spelled Kwooted.
Okay.
Because in my mind, now remember, I'm coming off this high of finding out that I can write things and somebody's going to listen. I'm like, oh, well, let me just do this. And so I do this ebook, and it's all these quotes. And what it ended up being is a book of quotes from things that I said on social media when I was on Facebook. And I just like literally went through, I don't know if you know this, but you can go through and just search for all the things you've said on Facebook and it'll come up by year. Yep. And so I compiled it, made this book. It wasn't that successful. Like my cousin loved it, but I'm not sure anybody else. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's not the right route. So at that time, that was 2014, that's 2015 when I published that.
Okay.
So then during that time, I'm like talking to, at the time I had a lot of male friends and my cousins who are male. And every time I would talk to them, they would say they were so confused, like they're married and they don't understand what's wrong with their wife. Like, why is she so unhappy when I pay the bills and she has this house and blah, blah, blah. And I would be like, well, did you ask her how she's feeling today? Did you ask her how she's doing? Like paying the bills and having a house does not make you a happy person. And they would really be like, what? Did I do what? We're talking about basic humanity, right? Like if you see someone on the street, you're like, hey, or hey, how are you? Even if you don't want a real answer, you still say that. So that is how I came up with the concept, listening to my male friends and my cousin in particular, who themselves were really unhappy and trying to figure out what would make their wives happy. And I remember I told my cousin, I said, you know what? I'm going to write a book called The Unhappy Wife. And I am going to ask your wife to tell me her story. And he was like, please do. Because I want to know too. So that's how the concept came around. And not by coincidence, I also was unhappy. So I could never remember if it's 12 or 13, but there are some stories in this book. And one of them is actually my story. So I was like, well, if I'm going to ask these women to talk to me about their marriages, then I have to be brave enough to talk about mine too. So,
well, and from reading that book, definitely some of those stories were shocking to say the least. And just to realize how unhappy people are, but how much we are willing to settle for in there. It shocks you, but it also makes you think like, wow, a lot of times we put ourselves in so many boxes in order to just keep things kind of going in our relationships and status quo. And like you mentioning at that moment in time, like one of those stories is yours. Not saying that that's the story that you should reference, but I was going to ask, when you were telling your story, what was one of the things that you were hoping to accomplish by sharing that?
So with all the stories, really, and I have like so many, my mind is always going. So I have actually like two answers. The first thing I think I want to say is that as I was listening to these other women's stories, I was like, oh, these stories are different than the story that I have.
Okay.
Because to answer your question, my goal was to get women to see exactly what you just said. Sometimes we settle.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do things just because our mama said that was the thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we do things because we're embarrassed to do anything else or to let anybody know that this is the thing we did. And now we got to kind of like backtrack and get up out of it. So that was my goal. I'm not sure that the women I interviewed feel like that, but because I think they were just so happy and relieved that someone wanted to hear about all of their pain and trauma. But that was really my goal. By the end of it, I was like, oh, this is how I like ended up separating it into those 3 parts, because I was like, oh, this is pretty common. There's so many ways that we give up our power.
Yes.
And we don't know that. And that's what by the end of it, that's what I wanted all women or any woman who reads the book to understand. Like, we have to stop for a second. And we have to, I think that was the book where I came up with like the 3 things, like you have to know yourself, love yourself, and be yourself. But at the foundation, you really have to know yourself. And I'm not sure that many of us do.
Agreed. And I think knowing ourselves is a journey. Because I personally, for myself, I would just honestly say now in my 50s that I know myself, and I feel like I'm still got room to evolve and grow.
Absolutely.
And I think everyone does. But coming to that realization is tough because a lot of times, especially if you're in relationships with somebody, you're so focused on trying to make that person happy that a lot of times you can lose yourself in that and forget to make you happy.
Yeah.
Do you feel like when you wrote that book, that was where you were in your situation?
Oh, I definitely knew it. So I think inside I knew it, like my spirit knew it, but I don't think I personally necessarily knew it to the extent that I know it now.
Okay.
And I would say that's why I'm nodding, because I'm like, girl, yeah, I literally last week just started another list in one of my journals, things I like.
Right.
Right? Like, what do you like? And I'm just like keeping like a little list. And every time something pops off, then I'm like, okay, I like X or whatever. Even if it's something like, I like being alone more than I thought that I did.
Right. And I think that's powerful because, again, that shows how you're continuously growing and evolving. So, like, do you feel at that stage when you wrote The Unhappy Wife that you are that you are a totally different person than where you are right now?
Oh, for sure. I am not that person at all. Okay. Yeah, I'm not that person at all. And I know we're going to get to it, but I have a book coming out now. And even when I've gone back and read it so many times, and I'm not even that person. And that's like a new book. So like, I'm absolutely not that person. I know that person who wrote that book was searching.
Okay.
And I think that's why it's such an interesting thing. The Unhappy Wife, that book was me trying to say something about myself too. But having I don't want to say comfort, because it wasn't really comforting. It was more like protection that other women have gone through this too. So I was able to kind of like, stick my little story in there around theirs. And it also, I think, it allowed me to stop judging women, something that I think is so common.
Yes.
Because I remember a friend of mine was reading the book, and she's doing like what we do, texting me after each story, like, girl, what?
Yes.
She's like, how's she gonna whatever? Like, how's she gonna like work on the drug problem after the marriage? And I was like, that's what people do. But it helped me to be able to say, we're not doing that. I'm not about to like judge, because how is this person's story any better or worse than anybody else's? It's just different. Same.
Absolutely. And that's part of the problem where, as women, we have a hard time building community because of the fact that we worry so much about what everybody thinks and don't recognize that when we are truthful and honest, even if we feel like it's embarrassing, it's healing for us and it's healing for the other person receiving that. So I commend you for even being in that space of mind where you could be that courageous and start to put your voice out there. I was going to ask, how is that a springboard for Daddy?
So what happened? The unhappy wife took so much out of me, and I have to tell you this. Like after each story, it took me about 2 weeks to write each story after I interviewed each woman.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got to, the 2 weeks, I'm like chugging liquor like you wouldn't believe, because I'm like, this is too much.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
this is why therapists, probably have
Yeah.
a process, because it really was like, again, these are stories that they're telling me that they've not told anybody. And the details are so horrific for some of them.
Yes.
And, I'm holding all that because I'm holding space for them, but then I'm also holding it in my body, because that was
Right.
back before I realized how to like get rid of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I did it was I was just get drunk and then I go start on the next story.
Wow.
But so I was like, well, I can't do that. That's not healthy. So for Daddy, I was like, maybe if I get other people to just write their stories, and if they're women writers, that'll be easier than me interviewing them, writing the thing, doing all of that. So Daddy is the same concept, but different, because I was like, nope, you're going to write your own story. I'm just going to edit this and then compile this into an anthology.
Okay. What were you trying to say with Daddy? Because since you have a message with the unhappy wife, what were you trying to say with Daddy?
Yeah, by the time I got to Daddy, it was so clear to me. And again, I have a story in this book too.
Mm-hmm.
It was so clear to me that if you had a great relationship with your dad, then you might avoid being an unhappy wife. That was the conclusion I came to.
Okay.
If you have these dysfunctional relationships with your dad, you probably are going to transfer that over to a romantic relationship. And I think it's something that we kind of know now in 2023 that's not shocking.
Right.
But I still don't think that we really get it, that before you commit to someone, you should probably clear up all the family stuff.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's not just for women. I think that's for men. It's both sides. Everybody has to deal with their childhood wounds. Yes.
Totally agree. Not to say that you can't be in relationship with someone, but I think it's really important to at least have kind of try to look at it, try to heal it, come up with some strategies so that you're not bringing that into a relationship with a person that you say you love.
Agreed. But, I think, again, that takes a lot of bravery. And especially when you're dealing with trauma on that level, I could only imagine. But I think for myself, when reading that, I was like, it did make me feel blessed that I did have a really beautiful relationship with my dad. I'm very grateful for that with both my parents. However, my heart kind of breaks for people who don't have those relationships, because you see it not just in the relationships that they're having with a partner, but just in the way that sometimes people move through the world, because they don't have that first love who loved them more than anything and never wanted anything back but them to be successful and happy. You just miss that. And I think that is something that, like you said, we need to talk more about on both sides, for men and for women, because it just robs us. It robs people of the truest experience of love.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's foundational, and we kind of minimize those foundational experiences in a lot of ways. I just want to throw out that there's a book called Mother Hunger, and it's by Kelly McDaniel. And it's specifically about mother-daughter relationships, and how if you don't have that foundational, everything that you just named, if you are missing any part of that, you are about to repeat some patterns.
Yeah. Because trauma is generational, and let's be real about that. And along that line, it makes me think is, obviously you've been able to cover unhappy wife and your daddy, and how have you been able to heal your generational trauma through these books?
So, when I was writing them, I didn't even think of it that way, but that's exactly what I was doing. So I'm glad that you recognize that. I think they were both like stepping stones to this bigger project,
Yes.
which really does outline how I did it. So I want to let me think for a second. It's really important. Well, it was really important for me to look at my, like in the mental health world, they call it your family of origin. And so I have two because I'm adopted. So I have an adoptive family and then I have a biological family. And it was really imperative for me to really sit with myself and think about how I feel in my body about each one of these relationships.
Okay.
How did I feel about my adoptive mother and my biological mother, my adoptive father, my biological father, and my adoptive grandmother? How have they shaped me? And what was their contribution to who I am? And like you said, how I moved through the world. Because when you have those foundational relationships, they can't help but to influence who you are. So that was like step one, was recognizing how I really felt about it. Because for so long, if we just take the adoption part of my history, I was taught to kind of like just sweep that under the rug. Like, it's not a big deal.
Right.
Who cares? This is your family now. My grandmother at one point told me when I started seeking my biological family, she was like, if somebody's family wanted to find them, then they would. And so it's kind of like battling. Yeah, it's like battling all of these things, right? But also sitting with that and pulling it apart and saying, how did that make me feel when she said that? How does it really feel to be adopted and not at that point know who your biological family is?
Yeah.
It sounds simple, but it's a lot.
Oh, I can imagine. And that makes me, as we're transitioning into your current project, is that the solve that you were searching for in your title, In Search of a Solve, Memoir of a Sex Addict?
So I think it was that, and it was, there were a lot of things, because there were a lot of ways that I was in pain, emotional pain, and didn't realize it. And so the adoption was just one. Yeah, there were, I have 3 abandonment wounds.
Okay.
Yeah. And so each one of those needed some type of care and tenderness that, because of circumstances, I could only give to myself.
Totally can understand that. And like I was saying, so that obviously is the first. And now we are here at this project. And like the Memoir of a Sex Addict, just kind of just having that in the title, just like, okay, you got my full attention.
Oh, good.
But again, and audience, let me just kind of preface that, guys. I have not read the book. It's just that from reading Kathy's other books, it's just kind of helping me see you painting this trajectory of healing and your journey. So do you mind kind of diving a little bit into your abandonment wounds a little?
Sure.
Or? Okay.
Yeah, so I can say what they are.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's fine. I was just, thinking, sometimes you don't want to share something because you want people to buy the product, but at the same time, I feel like, I feel like you still will, because as my my publisher says, they're going to come for the sex and then they're just going to get the healing without knowing it. So I don't mind.
Yes. And we're going to dive into the sex, because I obviously that talks to it. Cause let's all be honest. A lot of times we use sex as a solve, as a feel good, as whenever we need it. So we're going to get there. Okay. But I feel like if we're going to get there, we just got to get a little bit.
Yeah, we have to start. Okay. Yeah. So I will share what the 3 abandonment wounds were. So, I was born in 1973 in Chicago, and my mother actually had a mental illness. So she was thinking about aborting me. So it was May 1973. Roe v. Wade had just passed. And I know this just because I did so much digging, talked to DCFS, got all the things, all the documents. So all of this is in there about how she went back and forth trying to figure out if she was going to have a baby, have an abortion, give the baby up for adoption, and the baby is me. So what ended up happening is she kind of waited too late and ends up birthing me. And it looks like she tried to take care of me.
Right.
But again, she was mentally ill. It's the 70s. She's a Black woman.
Yeah.
So she ends up abandoning me in a building, an apartment building, for about 5 days. Mm-hmm. And so the police comes and just like a movie, saves me and takes me to wherever they take me to. Okay. So that's number one. Right. But I had not dealt with that. Like I'd known since my 30s that's when I started searching for people. And I read the document, but I still didn't, you have to let stuff sit with you. Right. I just kind of like read it and was like, okay, fine, let's put that,
And not to distract from obviously talking about your abandonment wounds, but did you always know that was how your story, your abandonment wound happened? Or I know you mentioned in your 30s, how did you come to realize that was what it was? Was that where you started to feel like something was missing? How did you know that was a wound?
No. So the thing about the body that I wish we all would I wish we would have like a quicker learning curve on this is that, your body always knows, so it holds on to stuff, right? Yes. And so I had a friend who was like, how, if you were a baby, how are you going to be like angry because of something that you didn't even know what was happening? And I couldn't articulate it at the time, but that's exactly what happens. You're a baby. You don't have the words to express how you feel. So imagine like a baby laying on a floor, abandoned, looking for its mother. I'm like 5 months old. Right. Yeah, you just hold on to it. And you eventually, like all babies do, you either learn that somebody's going to come and take care of you, pick you up, hold you, feed you, change you, whatever, or they're not. But it's not something that I knew, like, to be able to, like, just in the last few years, I've been able to express that's what that was. And that's really because of the book, because I was like trying to figure out like, well, like what happened here, right? So that would be the first one, though. Okay. Is that, from my biological mother.
And that's such a foundational wound right then, because obviously you're vulnerable, and that I think, I wonder, how did that contribute to your ability to be vulnerable in relationships? I think I'm starting, like I said, to kind of tee up where we get to the sex addict side of it.
Yeah, no, I wasn't able to. So something like that, that one specific thing causes what's called anxious attachment style. So I think now people are starting to talk about attachment style. Yes. So because of that can create an anxious attachment style. So I wasn't necessarily vulnerable, but I was clingy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's very different, because I would expect you to be emotionally unavailable, kind of like what we had talked about previously.
Yeah. I am too. So I'll get to that, how that happened. So I actually have two.
Okay.
I have two attachment styles. So one is like I'm super clingy because I don't know if people are going to stay or whatever. So I want them, I always want them to stay no matter what. The second abandonment, the second and third, I'll talk about at the same time. So I get adopted as a baby, like 10 months old. And my adoptive mother, but by a mother and a father, Black people. And I have to say that because I know, you can be adopted by whoever. Right. So my adoptive mother actually was disabled. She had kidney disease. Oh, wow. And my father, he just had a high school diploma. Okay. And so whatever, time goes on, we're all good. Around 10 years old, I find out that I'm adopted. And it's from reading a book that just happens to have been laying around, and it's called How I Was Adopted. And so I read this book, right? And I'm like bawling because I'm actually a very sensitive person. So I'm like reading, I'm like, these people don't know who their family is. Like, what is this? Somebody else is taking care of them? Who, like, what? And so my mother is like standing there watching me. I don't realize it. And she's like, what's wrong with you? And I was like,
Yeah.
man, this is a sad story. You mean that there are people out here who are taking care of babies that don't belong to them?
Yeah.
So she's like, well, yeah, but like, don't cry because you're adopted. But and then I just, so I learned how to suppress really well, kind of go to my room and cry my eyes out, and then we never talk about it again.
Ooh.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. But that's not the wound. That's just leading up to it.
Yeah.
So then my mother, because she has this illness, she actually dies when I'm 16.
Mm-hmm.
Leaves with my father, who now I know was probably had some depression, but he just completely turns into a totally different person that I had never known, and really abandons me, sends me to live with my grandmother in another state, and gives up his parental rights when I'm 17, when there's no reason to do that. So, right, that's like abandonment wound 2 and 3.
Right.
And so I'm sharing those two to show. So what you talked about earlier is that avoidant attachment style. That's how that forms. So because now I'm conscious, I'm not a baby.
Right.
I know what's going on. It's very clear. And now I learned that I can't trust anybody.
Right.
Least of all the people who were supposed to take care of me.
Yeah. And that is like the hardest thing to see. And I'm glad that we are having this conversation. I'm glad that more people are talking about it, because it doesn't just impact people on a relational level. I mean, it impacts every aspect of your life, because there's distrust in everything, because you don't feel comfortable in being vulnerable, because unfortunately you've been in situations where it's like, I've been let down. I have been mistreated by people who should be loving and caring for me. So in that, and knowing that you have discovered this about yourself and how you move through, how do you feel that you became a sex addict?
Yeah, so I know for a fact, what I'll start with is to say this, and especially for anyone who's listening, all addiction, according to, his name is Gabor Mate, and you can Google his name and addiction and a bunch of stuff will come up. But according to him, all addiction is rooted in trauma or in unresolved childhood trauma, because you can have trauma and not become an addict. It really depends on how you perceive it and how you feel about it and a bunch of other layered things. But if you are addicted to something, 9 times out of 10 is because you had some type of unresolved childhood trauma. So to answer your question, I know that that's where the sex addiction came from. I learned very early on that like sex felt good. And it kind of, and this is like scientific. So sex actually calms you, which is why so many of us use it, even if you're not a sex addict. Like you said earlier, this is why we use it, because it feels good. It calms you down. It changes your parasympathetic nervous system. When you're feeling a way, then sex, good or bad, can make you feel better.
Absolutely. I mean, endorphins, I mean, there's just so many benefits to sex.
Right.
But there is also, like you said, the possibility where it can slip into addiction.
Right.
Do you remember the moment that you realized that you were a sex addict?
I do. I talk about this in the book. So there's a concrete moment where I actually take like an online quiz, because there's an event that happens. I have this experience and it's crazy. And my husband knows about it. And he even said something like, you have issues and they always come out in sex, because we've been together a long time. So he knows things. But of course, neither of us knew like whatever. So I think it was early enough where Google was a thing, and I just kind of Google sex addiction, and a quiz comes up, and I take the quiz, and like by the end of it, it's like, yeah, you definitely have a problem, and you need to see someone. But that was like early 2000s.
Okay.
And I did that. But I had suspected something was wrong. But I didn't know like the terminology for it. I had suspected it when let me see, we got married in 96. And then about 6 years later or so, there were these patterns that I had of developing a relationship with men, having sex with men, keeping a bunch of men on hand, because those are all like characteristics of a sex addict. So I was doing that before we got married. When we got married, I think to myself, oh, this is going to just, because you don't know. I'm like, oh, this is going to miraculously like solve itself. And then I think it was 2000, I have to go back, maybe around 2000, that I meet a man. And this is the first time that I'm married and meet a man. And I'm like trying actively to not engage or not do anything. And we never did anything, just to be clear. But that's when I knew it's the compulsion. And so the compulsion is also what makes it sex addiction as opposed to just using sex. Yeah, it's like it was a feeling that you are out of control.
And I can only imagine that, because I was going to ask, like, with that, it always seems like you're trying to like fill a hole, fill a void. And so I was wondering, do you feel like, or can you articulate what type of hole or feeling you were trying to fill in that moment?
Sure. It's always loneliness.
But how are you lonely though? You're married.
Right. So how are you lonely? Right. How are you lonely and you're married? That's because that book that I referenced earlier, Mother Hunger.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, it's such a good title because that's exactly what it is. You're always craving for what you didn't have when you were a child or when you were a baby. Right. And so if you think about, again, a baby being abandoned in a building for 5 days, a 5-month-old, yeah, that baby is craving all types of basic things.
Yes.
And so that feeling never goes away. So I could have, like I said, even like before I was married, I would have like 3 or 4 dudes, like just on hand. And so and because of all of those attachment style things, right? So that's what I mean. That's the anxious attachment style. I'm going to keep all these people with me.
Right.
Because one of you might leave. So that's the avoidant part. This is how all this works together. You might leave, dude A. So I need like B, C, and D, just in case. And then none of it is ever really making you feel better except in the moment.
Oh, and that's the thing, because we get sometimes so easily pacified by momentary fixes versus long term. So I can see how that trap can happen.
Right. And especially with something like sex, how long does it really last? I mean, and I'm not talking about any bravado type thing. Like, seriously, right?
Yeah. We're really let's all be honest, we're probably talking about a good, maybe honest 15, 20 minutes at best.
Right. And then after that 20 minutes, somebody like me and other sex addicts, you actually feel really shitty afterwards. It doesn't feel good at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you do wonder, as a sex addict, like after you've done that, it's not love? It really is it, or is it more so like, okay, don't let the door hit you on the way out?
So there is something called a love addict, and I'm not sure if I have that, but I have. I have to be careful how I say this. So in the book shows how. I think I'll keep it with attachment style. So because of that anxious attachment style, in the book, I show how in one relationship, I'm like clinging to this guy when it really should have just been like, okay, goodbye. But I'm clinging to him while being married. So really, I'm having these 2 relationships, having this double life because I can't let go. But it's not because so it might feel like love, but of course it's not love. It's just you being a scared little girl.
Wow. And I think it's good that we're talking about it, because if we really all sat here and thought about how we move through relationships, how we move through life, sometimes it does go back to, like, I think about, those relationships where maybe we're all a little too clingy, even though we know this is not what we're supposed to be doing, because you're just afraid to let it go. You're afraid to be vulnerable. You're afraid to go back out. And so I admire that you were able to see that in yourself.
Yeah.
How did you make the decision, though, in the middle of that, to marry your husband? Like, what was the moment that said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and marry this dude?
So I got married really young by today's standards. I think I was 23. Let me
Okay.
see. Yeah, we are coming up on 27 years.
Okay.
So I got married at 23. We met in undergrad, and we met before I knew anything was anything, right?
Yeah.
So all I know when we get together and we get married is that my mother died. I'm adopted. I feel kind of bad about it, and the adults around me didn't handle it very well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it, right? Like, just on some regular Black family stuff. Just, okay, so you suppress this, you blah, blah, blah. But not like to the depth where you're like, I have a problem. I didn't know that until we got married in 96. I didn't know that until, like I said, about 2000.
Okay.
And that's when things started, like, where I'm thinking like, oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah, what am I going to do? And then I like to remind people too, that 2000, even though it's 2000, is not like 2023. So today, yeah, like you can Google sex addiction, and it'll be like therapist. You want a therapist in Florida? You want one in Chicago? You want one in Hawaii, right? Do you want one that deals with love addiction, sex addiction, alcoholism, family issues? Like, there's a list. No, 2000 was not like that.
Yeah, 2000 was, if you had an issue, you were just trying to figure it out. Actually, that was more of the let me pray it away, try to focus on it. You know,
or hide just not even think about it, right? Or hide it. And so that's what I ended up calling myself doing, hiding it.
How have you navigated this now? So, like, now you're here and you have decided you are going to tell your story and your journey. How has that feeling of putting the story out there been for you? How have you felt about this?
So it took me 9 years to get to this point, and the story actually came about because I was trying to figure out, I had, like all addicts have, I had this rock bottom moment, and I had to figure out for good, like, what is going on here. So I started putting all these pieces together, but it started with me writing, like, about my earliest memory of myself, like, who am I and why am I doing this? So the book went through a bunch of iterations, right? Because I'm a professor, like I said before, and I was like, I'm certainly not about to write a book that's got sex addiction in the title or in the pages. I'm just not doing that, right? Okay. So that's like early on. So I think my first book was going to be called, I was going to only focus on adoption. And it was going to be called what my mother named me, which was Petulia. Okay. And it was just only going to focus on adoption and blah, blah, blah. But it just didn't feel right. So then I read Melody Beattie's Codependent No More. And I get more information. I was like, oh, I'm just codependent, right? Because I was like, oh, that's all this is. So I changed the title, changed everything. It was going to be called Codependent. Then I don't know how I came across, like, the sex addiction literature, like what the first thing was. But as soon as I read it, I was like, oh no, I have to write about sex addiction. And I have to write about some really deeply personal and what some people would perceive to be embarrassing things. But I just knew in my heart that if I was going to write it, if I'm going to write a memoir, it has to be that. I just knew it. Pardon me. And part of that is, like, I've always told myself this the past couple of years. There's a reason why I'm Black. There's a reason why I'm a woman.
Yes.
And there's a reason why I have this particular affliction. It is not by coincidence. And that's what's helped me to kind of push forward and say, oh, this is what I had to write. So initially I was a little nervous that's what I'm trying to say. Like, right. I didn't want to divulge this part of me.
Right.
Once I decided, I was like, oh, that's it. Got to do it. Yeah.
I'm glad that you did that. But I know that takes a lot of courage, especially like you said, as a professor, to put yourself out in that way, as a wife, as a mother. How has your family been navigating this?
Yeah. So, and I think to piggyback off that other answer, for me, once I admitted things to myself, so with my husband, there are certain things he knew. There's certain things he didn't know. There's certain things he suspected. And of course, if I'm going to write a book called, with sex addict in the subtitle, I have to tell my husband about it.
Right.
So once I told him, I actually felt better just internally and energetically, because when you hold stuff in, it affects you.
Absolutely.
That has been very rocky. I mean, just to say the least, it's like sometimes it's like great and like it was before. And a lot of times, though, it's like a lot of him being triggered by things and, me having to figure out like, what are we doing today? Or what happened? All I said was trees. And all of a sudden you are angry about something. So there's that part. He has been supportive, though.
Good. Oh, go ahead, please. No, and I'm glad that he's been supportive, because it's a lot. It's a lot. Let's just be honest. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and I want to say that he has been super supportive. So, in his words, he wants me to do well. He wants the book to do well. He recognized that. But then there's this other part where, of course, he's processing, and that's a lot. And then we're processing together. And so I have to remind myself, too. So I've been 9 years thinking about these things. For him, it's just been 2.
Right.
So there's that, too.
Yeah. Okay. And what about your children?
So I have 2 daughters in their 20s. And initially, when I told my oldest daughter, and I kind of gave her like the bullet points of what it was going to be. Okay. And initially she said, oh, Mommy, I'm not reading that. And I was like, okay. So, I understand. But I did tell her, I said, I'm not going to pressure you. I'm still going to give you a book. But I get it. I said, but sometimes when you read about where you came from, that kind of helps you to understand yourself a little better. And she's like, for sure. Of course. And so that was a few months ago. And she said no. And I think she's coming around now. Okay. My youngest daughter, from the beginning, has been super supportive, has said that she's going to read the book cover to cover. I asked her, did she want me to give her some bullet points? And she said no. She just wants to read it and enter, it's just like a regular book. And I was like, okay. And I've asked her a few times. And she was like, no, it's, she said that she understands that I am more than just her mother and that I am a person with a whole life. So
I think that's amazing. And I was going to say, I hope, or how does that make you feel?
Yeah. So I am happy to hear that. But still, she hasn't read the book yet. So, so I told her to keep her, therapist number handy in case she needs to. Yeah, because she might need to process something and you might not want to look at me to do that. So.
And that is fair. But I love the fact that you, for the most part, it seems like your family is supporting you as you are putting this out there. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing. Yeah. Because I was going to ask you, obviously, how are you preparing for this? Because again, this is putting it out there for the world. You've talked to the family, but now here comes everybody else to talk. How have you preparing yourself and your soul for this?
So I think over the past couple of years, once I decided that I was going to publish, a couple of things have happened. The the publisher, the editor actually helped me immensely. Like, so I had some developmental editing, and she's a Black woman.
Okay.
And so her edits are like, girl, you're gonna have to explain why you blah 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 blah.
Yes, because we require more detail. You know that. We want to know. Don't play with us.
Right. So to have that like Black female editor, it really did help to shape everything and also to get my head right, because I was like, yeah, because somebody, and she would say that, she was like, somebody's going to read this and say, for example, like, you were doing all this stuff, who was taking care of the kids? And she was like, I hate to say that. She said, but people are going to ask you that. And my answer, then I had to put it in there. Yeah. Like, basically, I get it. The perception is going to be like, I had this double life and I'm out here doing all these things. And no, well, we still live in this patriarchal society. I was taking care of the kids. I was taking care of the kids. I was cooking dinner. I was blah, blah, blah. And I was doing all the things. But yeah, so having her there to kind of like push me and thinking like a real person helped me to get into a certain frame of mind, because I was like, oh yeah, somebody's probably going to ask this. She would also ask me questions like, she's like, what are you going to do when somebody's gets up and asks your husband, what does it feel like to be married to a sex addict? And I was like, what? Do you think somebody's going to ask me that? And she was like, girl, somebody might say that. I was like, okay.
Yeah, I hate to tell you. I was going to say they might. Yeah.
Right. So it's having like questions like that posed that have put me in this frame of mind. Then there's just like the regular stuff that I do also to help me not, well, I don't want to say it that way. I want to say the things that I do now to help me stay in recovery is really what it is, right? So exercising, including yoga. I've been doing yoga forever, but now I do it with so much intention. Meditating, knowing the difference between doing a grounding meditation, so I can be here in the world with everybody else and deal with it, as opposed to something else, where I'm like trying to tap in, knowing when I need to do that and when I need to kind of like back up and do something else. Even if it's something like, I just need to drink a cup of hot tea because it feels like a warm hug.
Yes.
Yeah. So having all these strategies has helped me. And I think the final thing that is gonna kind of like, if we bring it back like to the unhappy wife, because I know and because I teach too, so many people's business that, and I hope this comes off the correct way.
I'm sure it will.
Yeah, like, it is okay for you to judge that I have written this book and the contents of it. And even if you want to judge me, but I know for a fact that everybody has something that they do not want to share. And so, like, I don't know, it's okay. Like, I know it's okay.
Yeah, because like you said, what's the saying? Don't throw stones in a glass house.
Right.
Everybody's house is made of glass. So if we really wanted to get
every single person's.
Yeah. Yep. We all have something that makes us uncomfortable and cringe just a little bit. So I agree. Judgment is kind of one of those things that you need to be very cautious of. And especially at this level of life that we're doing, because it seems to me like all things come back.
Right.
All things come back. So just need to chill out and just respect someone's healing process.
Right. And I've told my husband this. I'm like, if people read this book and all they think to themselves is whatever negativity they want to say, then they've not read it in the right spirit.
Agreed. And that's not your thing to control. Right. So totally get that at all. 100%. So now from our conversation, we've kind of like laid a foundation, if we think about it, in reference to where you began to where you are now. And it seems like every one of them that you were trying to tell a story, or every one you were at a different phase of life. So now that you have written your memoir, if you could use one word to describe where you are right now in this phase of life, what would it be?
I would say that I feel whole. Yeah. I feel whole. And for so long I didn't, because you feel like especially when you're adopted, you feel like you're missing something. Well, you're missing your family, right?
Right.
But after getting all of the pieces and all of the questions answered, now I know, like, first of all, I know no mistakes were made, because that's also kind of how you feel. But I think whole. Yeah, I feel wholeness.
Good. I'm glad, because everybody deserves to be at that point where they feel whole.
Yeah.
Where do you see this journey taking you now? So, like, now that you're about to embark on your book tour and start talking more about it, where do you see this taking you?
I'm hoping it takes me to spaces where people are receptive of this message and where people want to actually heal themselves in some way. All of the reviews, the advanced reviews, have been that this book is about more than just sex addiction.
Right.
And everyone who's read it, depending on where they are in their life and what they have in their background, has been able to read it and think like, oh, how can I do better? Or am I this person in this scenario? Or how can I be a better parent? Or anything. So that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that to be in spaces where people want to have these conversations and become like better versions of themselves.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, how can we support you? Where can we find you? Tell us all the details, because we must follow this journey that you're on.
So my personal blog is where I put all of the stuff. So Quoted, it's KWOTED.wordpress.com. That's the personal blog. I also have an author website, kegarland.com. And I am K.E. Garland on Instagram and on X. I almost said Twitter. I want to say Twitter.
That's okay. You can call it whatever you like.
Right. We don't acknowledge that.
No. Not at all.
Oh gosh. So I also have navigatingthechange.com for those people who are navigating really any changes, but it started off like to talk about menopause and midlife, but we're all navigating changes. So it's kind of evolved. And the same on Instagram. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Well, I will make sure, guys, that I have all of Kathy's information in the show notes. I have two questions left for you before I let you go. Okay. So my first question is, if you've talked a lot about your journey, you've told us a lot about you, what is one thing that you would want my audience and the world to know about you that you have not said today already?
I think that's a very interesting question. So I think the one thing I would want people to know specifically about me, I keep like seeing the word resilience in my brain. So I'm going to go with that. Like, I think I want people to know that I am resilient, but there's a difference between resilience and like armor, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. So I recently had someone tell me that they don't worry about me because they know I'm strong. Now, they don't mean just in general. It was like a very specific situation. The person was like, yeah, I don't worry about you because I know that you're strong. Like, you can handle it.
Okay.
And I had to say, that's true, but I still get my feelings hurt.
Yes.
And so I think the message that's coming through that I want to share is that be careful about how you perceive people. People can be resilient, and we've kind of made that like into some like wonderful thing, which it is.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that that person doesn't have feelings or emotions, or also need to be like tended to, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. You're tender.
Yeah.
And that is a beautiful thing. So,
Yeah.
no, thank you for sharing that. And then my final question for you is, it looking at where you are and what you're about to embark on and everything that you have gone through and are at, are you happy?
I am. I'm like super happy. And I have to say, like, there have been times when people thought I was happy, because I also have like a really wide smile. And so as soon as I smile, people are like, oh, it's kind of like what I just said. Like, they don't worry. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, she must be okay. No, like now when I smile, or even if I'm not, I feel I'm like more than happy. I'm actually just at peace, which I think is even better in some ways. But yeah, I'm definitely happy. I feel so grounded, and I feel so like confident in my body now, whereas before I didn't. Like before my body felt like, you ever see like those images of like a ball of whatever, like all jumbled up? That's how I
Yes.
used to walk around feeling.
Wow.
Yeah. And now I'm just kind of like,
Oh, I'm so happy for you, because being truly happy, being truly at peace within ourselves after you outlining your journeys and the way that you are sharing them, that's a lot. And that is an accomplishment. And so I'm very excited for you. And I'm very thankful that you sat down with me and shared yourself with us. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you even saying that. So.
Aw, anytime. And we'll definitely have to have you back. So I am here. You are welcome. You are part of the community now. So I just want to thank you. And I want to thank everyone for listening. This was definitely a conversation I was really excited to have. And it was everything that I wanted it to be. I hope you all took some beautiful nuggets, and I will have all of Kathy's information, as well as, when does the book come out officially? Like, we didn't talk about that.
Literally 2 weeks from now, September 26th.
Okay, so I will make sure that I post it again on September 26th, but we will be ready, because I cannot wait to read your book, and I'm very excited about talking to you about your journey. And so I wish you the best of luck on your book tour, and you're going to change and help a lot of people.
I hope so. Thank you, Pam. I really appreciate that. I have to say, I know you're closing, but I have to say, like, from the moment we met, I was like, oh no, this is like some heart-centered something.
Yes, totally agree. It was like kismet, y'all, over breakfast at first watch. That's how we kind of connected through Aura, and it's just been an amazing conversation. So I'm just really grateful that we've had this connection again, and we're going to keep it going.
Absolutely. I'll be back.
Yes. Awesome. Yes, you definitely will. So guys, I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.